Hello everyone, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to our webinar today all about maternity pay in Sage 50 Payroll. My name's Duncan, I'm one of your presenters today and I am joined by my colleague Alice, who will be co-presenting alongside me, as well as Paddy and Lee, who are there in the background ready and waiting to answer your questions. Let's now take a look at what we're going to cover in the webinar. So I'm going to start things off by running through a brief introduction to statutory maternity pay and some of the legislation and rules around it. And I'm also going to cover reclaiming statutory parental payments and how to set that up in your software. I'm then going to hand over to Alice, who's going to take us through recording maternity details in Sage 50 Payroll. And that will automatically calculate the statutory maternity pay that is payable. Just going to show you how to check that and also how to adjust your employees' payments, including using the Makeup Basic option. Once she's been through all that, she's going to hand back to myself and I'm going to run through the process of reclaiming statutory payments at the end of each month. And we've got a quick section at the end on some troubleshooting and some top tips and areas to check if you find there are any issues when it comes to processing maternity yourself. We're going to stick around at the end to give you that opportunity to read through the questions and answers, download the handouts, and for us to give the final answers to any questions that might be coming through. So that's our plan. Let's get things kicked off with an introduction to statutory maternity pay. So SMP is the abbreviation of statutory maternity pay, and it's a payment made by employers to qualifying employees when they're taking time off to have a baby. So this is the statutory amount. You may well have a company maternity scheme that pays over and above the SMP amount. But in terms of SMP, it is payable for up to 39 weeks. The 6 weeks is paid at the higher rate, and that is 90% of your employee's average weekly earnings. And then the following 33 weeks are paid at a standard rate, which for the current tax year is £172.48 per week, or 90% of average weekly earnings if that is lower. But that will increase in the new tax year, and the rates will automatically be increased in your software once you start processing in that new tax year for a maternity leave that spans more than the current tax year. So no need to worry about manually increasing those rates. So what does an employee need to do to qualify? Well, to be eligible for SMP, the employee must be on your payroll in the qualifying week. So the qualifying week is 15 weeks before the expected week of childbirth. They need to give you the correct notice and give you proof that they're pregnant. That's usually the MAP-B1 certificate they get from the midwife or doctor. They need to have been continuously employed for at least 26 weeks up to any day in the qualifying week. And they'll also need to earn at least £123 per week in the 8-week relevant period. So that's the period that leads up to the qualifying week. And you can read more about the eligibility and what you need to do if an employee is not eligible by following the advice on the gov.uk website, which we've linked to here in the handout. So a quick look at some key dates, just to visualize some of that information I've just given you. So we're counting back from the due date, also known as expected week of confinement or EWC. And if we count down or back 15 weeks, that takes us to the qualifying week, 15 weeks before the due date. And then going back another 26 weeks takes you to the latest start date for an employee to be eligible for the payment. So their start date must be at least 26 weeks before the qualifying week for that length of service condition to be met. You've got the 8-week period leading up to the qualifying week, which is where the average weekly earnings are calculated. The earliest leave date, so the earliest date that the maternity leave can begin, is 11 weeks before the due date, unless baby arrives before that point, in which case it would start at the point the baby is born. And for employees who are off sick due to a pregnancy-related sickness, receiving SSP will need to transfer to SMP 4 weeks before the due date. So that's the transfer point if they're on SSP and it's a pregnancy-related sickness. So that's just a bit of background on some key dates and legislation. The other thing I want to cover before I hand over to Alice is reclaiming statutory payments. So any statutory parental payment will be mostly funded by the government, or in some cases fully funded, as most employers will be able to reclaim 92% of any statutory maternity, paternity adoption, or shared parental pay that they pay out to their employees. Now, if you qualify for what's known as small employers relief, you can actually reclaim 103% of the amount that you've paid out. So 100% of the statutory payment and 3% known as NI compensation. To qualify for small employers relief, you'd need to have total Class 1 national insurance contributions of £45,000 or less in the tax year before the qualifying or matching week. And there's a setting in your software to enable you to claim the small employers percentage, that 103%. So I'm going to show you how to check your total Class 1 national insurance and where to find that setting that you'll need to set up before you process the statutory payment if you want to reclaim the correct percentage. So I'm just going to bring my slides down and you'll see that I'm logged into my payroll. And first thing I want to do is to check what my total Class 1 national insurance was in the previous tax year. So it's really simple to do. First of all, change your process date to the last day of the previous tax year. So that would be the 5th of April, 2023 in this example. And then you run your P32 report for the full tax year, so for months 1 to 12. So there's actually a link to the P32 report within the payroll links. You'll also find it in your main reports option. Usually you'd run it monthly to work out your monthly payment, but for this one, we're going to run it for the full year, for the previous tax year. And if I just show you that on screen, you can see it's for tax year 22 to 23, and my gross national insurance is coming in below that £45,000 limit. So that indicates that I do qualify for small employers relief when it comes to recovering statutory parental payments. So just to set that up, I'm going to change my process date back to my last pay date in the current tax year. And if I go to my company tasks and then settings, you'll see on the details tab, there is a checkbox. It's the first one on the list to say that you're eligible for small employers relief. And we recommend that you check this setting at the start of each tax year. So I've already got it selected because I am eligible, but you should check that it's ticked if you're eligible for it, or that it's not ticked if you don't qualify, in which case you'll just reclaim the standard 92%. So that's reclaiming statutory payments. We're going to show you how that works later on in the demo and how to set up for small employers relief. So that's it for me for now. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Alice, and she's going to take us through recording maternity details. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you very much for that, Duncan, and good afternoon, everybody. Let's move on to recording maternity then. There's two main things you're going to need for this. The first one being the date your employee wants to start their maternity leave. And you'll also need medical evidence, which is usually the MAP-B1 form. Recorded SMP in Payroll, it's generally just a case of popping in some dates and details into Payroll, and the program's going to automatically calculate that amount of SMP due in the current period, and all in line with current legislation, as Duncan mentioned before. But before I ramble too much, I will just jump straight into Payroll, and I just want to show you how to record this. So I'll bring that up. There's a few different options of how to record SMP. So I'm going to show you my preferred way, which is via the quick SMP window. I'll also show you the other way, just in case you fancy that way instead. Totally personal preference which one you use though. So we'll highlight my employee who's going on maternity pay, which is going to be employee number 1. And I'm going to go to the payroll tasks in the bottom left, and I'm going to find recording maternity. You can also find this in the employee tasks as well. So we'll click on that, and up comes that quick SMP window. This is my preferred way, just everything is in one place. It's nice and easy to see, but let's get ahead with recording that. So first of all, I'm going to tick that medical evidence is received because I have got that MAP-B1 form from my employee. If you do need a bit of a reminder of what that is as well, just click this little question mark and it'll just kind of clarify a little bit more what that medical evidence is. And I'm also going to put in the baby's due date as well, which for this employee is the 10th of Feb 2024. I can either click tab on my keyboard or click check entitlement, and that's the payroll kind of doing some background checks, just seeing if this employee qualifies for SMP. And you can see here we're green across the board, we've got ticks next to everything, because we do have that medical evidence. They have worked long enough, so they've worked, their employee start date is prior to that 26 weeks before the qualifying week. And they have also earned enough because they've earned over an average of £123 a week, which is calculated during those 8 weeks leading up to the qualifying week. Speaking of those average earnings, we can see them underneath, which the payroll's calculated at £461.54. And if we did want a bit more clarification on how the payroll's got that average, we can come down to the earnings during a set period. And we can just see there's been 2 monthly payments for this employee of £2,000. If you did have a weekly employee, for example, there would be some more figures in here, but ultimately it's doing the same thing, and it's just reaching this figure of the average earnings during that period. Also see some key dates as well on the right hand side, as Duncan mentioned in that timeline before. So we've got the due date, and we've also got like the latest start date for employment, the earliest date the leave could have started, which would have been back in November. But my employee actually wants to leave on the 8th of Feb. They're cutting it quite close. But we're going to click enter this last day of work, click tab on my keyboard, and what this now does is it calculates that SMP. If we look down in the bottom right, we can see this entitlement table, which shows the first 6 weeks at the higher rate, which the payroll's calculated, £415.39. And then the rest of the entitlement, so the next 33 weeks, is going to be the standard rate of £172.48. But do remember, if the SMP continued into the new tax year, as this one will, the new rate would kick in for any of those periods which fall into that new tax year automatically, so no need to do that manually. Got a couple more boxes on the left as well, which is still blank. Reason being, the baby's not actually born yet, so we don't know what that date of birth is. And the return to work date as well, we can leave that blank because we're not quite sure when the employee is going to come back to work. It still will calculate, as you can see, without these dates, but if you do know what they are, just pop those in here. We also have special circumstances, so if there are any special circumstances surrounding the pregnancy, such as things to do with trade dispute, or the maternity pay period has had to start early due to sickness or due to early birth, you can just tick these boxes accordingly, or of course enter the number up here, and then you'll click OK. So I'm happy with all of this information in here. I'm going to click Save, and I'm also going to print off a nice little summary of all of this information. I've got a PDF of this, which I got before, so let's pull that across and just make it a bit bigger. And as we can see, we've got the SMP details for Miss Employee 1, a nice summary of everything, the qualifying conditions, the average earnings, key dates, and then of course the entitlement due as well at the higher and standard rate. It's a good idea just to have this for your own records, and you could also provide a copy to the employee just as kind of proof of what you've put into the payroll as well. But I'm happy with all of that in here. So that's recording maternity with the quick SMP option. I'm going to close this. But as I mentioned, there is another way of doing that as well. And for that, you're just going to go into the employee's record. So I can either double click or right click and open employee. And we're just going to go across to the absence tab. And at the bottom, you'll see SMP. Now we do have adoption pay, paternity pay and everything here as well. So this is where you could also input that. We also have a webinar on paternity pay coming up on Thursday at 11. So if you do have spare time and you want to learn all things paternity, do come along to that. But for today, we're just going to stick with SMP. So I'll click on that. So as you can see, the dates and things are already in here because we have already recorded it. But just this is a kind of alternative way of recording it if you wanted to. Got all that same information, so we've got the key dates, we've got the medical evidence, that average the payroll's worked out, and then of course those special circumstances as well. If we just move across to the 8 weeks gross tab, we've got confirmation of that qualifying week, as well as that table to kind of show how the payroll's worked out, the 8 weeks average earnings. And if we just go along to the entitlement tab, we can see again just that qualifying week, and at the bottom the entitlement table showing the higher and standard rate. You'll notice as well we've got a table showing what's currently due or previously paid for SMP, and this is all just zeros at the moment. The reason for that being zeros is because if you look, just follow my mouse down at the bottom of the screen, we can see my process date is still just set to the 31st of January. And because that the maternity pay doesn't start until the 9th, it's not actually calculating anything just yet, hence why there's zeros. But obviously I do want to calculate, so let's take a little look at how we can do that. I'm going to come out of the record, back to the payroll tasks, and I'm going to go change my process date to my next pay date, which is going to be the 29th of Feb. Click OK. And I'm just going to go, again, payroll tasks to enter payments. I've got the salary in here as normal, but I'll come back to that a little bit later. And if we go across to summary, we can see now there is something calculating for SMP. So that was showing kind of zeros before. We've now got an amount there, and I'm happy with that amount. But if I was kind of curious how it's getting to that amount there, I can click on this little arrow, and that's going to bring me, it's like a little shortcut straight to that maternity pay information in the record. So I can come onto here, click on the entitlement tab, and we can see now that we've changed the process date, it's calculating 3 weeks in the amount of £1,246.17. And this is also a great window if you are troubleshooting anything to do with maternity pay, which Duncan will go across with you a little bit later. So we'll leave that for him to go through. And just a reminder to retain the declaration as well, provided by the employee. But I'm happy with that figure. So I'm just going to close enter payments. And what we'll do, we'll just have a little bit of a recap of what we've just done, because that's all things to do with recording maternity. That's kind of all you need to do, really. So I've got map B1 on the left, just an example of that. And on the right, just a screenshot of that quick SMP window. So everything's all in one place, nice and easy to put in those dates and things. But I also showed you where you could record that in the record. So you could go in, you could go to absence and then SMP, and you could record that same information, just in a slightly different layout. We also checked in enter payments, so we changed the process date. We went to the summary tab and just checked that that was calculating all okay. And if we did want a bit more clarification on that figure, we could click the little arrow and we could go to the entitlement tab, which would show how much is currently due and the amount as well. So that's the statutory amount taken care of. But I just want to dive a little bit into adjusting your employees' payments as well. Before I do go into this though, just bear in mind, this is very company specific. It does depend on the contract you've got with your employees and any other company policies that you might have in place as well. If you've got a certain way of adjusting payments which works for yourself, absolutely continue with that. But this section is just going to have a couple of kind of common scenarios for adjusting pay. Starting with a scenario where your company policy might require you to top up the maternity pay to make it up to their normal full salary. So in this scenario, I'll be using something called Make Up Basic. So we'll pop back to payroll. And again, just back to enter payments. As you can see, I've already got the full salary in here of £2,000, but I'm just going to go across to summary again. And you can see at the moment, payroll is kind of adding together these two figures. So whereas they would normally get £2,000, they're actually coming out with £3,246. So it's a lot more than we're wanting to pay them as a company policy. What Make Up Basic is going to do is it's going to work out how much salary this SMP payment needs to top it up to that kind of normal amount. And I'll show you this in action just so it makes a little bit more sense. But first things first, check you've got that full salary in the payments tab. Come back to summary, and then we're going to click on Make Up Basic. So it says you've selected to make up to basic the statutory payment for this employee. To do this, the hours and number value of salary, which is just the name of my pay element, will need to be reduced. Do you want to continue? If yours is called something different, obviously that name will be replaced, but yes, we want to continue. So click on that. And straight away, you'll notice the gross pay has now reduced to their full salary amount. It's no longer adding the full wage to the maternity. And what it's done this by is if you go back to payments, we can see it's reduced the hours and number value of the salary pay element. So they're getting the maternity pay as normal, but it's getting topped up with a little bit of salary to make it up to what they would normally get per month. And this goes for like weekly as well, so you can use it in other scenarios but this is just kind of how that Make Up Basic works. Let's have a little look. I'm just going to move this back to what it was before, and I'm going to move on to the next scenario as well. So that's Make Up Basic. I'm just going to move on to something called a manual adjustment as well. So for scenarios where you perhaps don't have a company policy, you don't pay anything above that statutory amount, you might just need to work out how much the salary this person's got before they went on maternity leave. In my case, the employee left on the 8th with maternity starting on the 9th of February, but they've actually worked 6 days before they left. There's 21 working days in Feb for this employee, and this £2,000 here is for that full 21 days. But I want to work out how much are they getting for only 6 of those days. So to do that, I can click in the hours and number box, click this little calculator, and I can say, well, they've worked 6 days out of the total 21 in Feb, click equals, and if I click tab on my keyboard, you'll notice this amount here is reduced from £2,000 to £571.40. And that's basically the payroll's kind of looked at this full salary for the month and thought, well, if that's for the 21 days, this is how much they'll be getting for 6. You can also use that in other scenarios. If you've, for example, got a leaver, if someone's left like 12 days into the month and you need to work out how much to pay them, you can just use that same principle there and do that manual adjustment. And next month, with them only being on SMP, let me just show you, I could just remove this figure to 0. And next month, they would only get that SMP. But for today, they'll be getting that little 6 days as well, because that's what they worked. So that's how to adjust their pay for a few scenarios. So firstly, with Make Up Basic, if you top up their pay. And secondly, with a manual adjustment, if you just need to work out how much they're getting for a certain amount of days as well. And I'm happy with those adjustments. Everything's looking good to me. But there's one last little adjustment I would like to do, which is for the pension contributions. So usually the employer is required to keep up with a regular pension contribution based on the employee's salary. I would recommend, though, if you're unsure or if you've got no idea what I'm talking about, definitely check with the pension provider just to see if this applies to your company. It might not. But as the salary has been reduced from £2,000 to £571.40, naturally so has the employer's pension contributions. So I normally would contribute £44.40, but because that salary has been reduced and my pension's worked out as a percentage, these pension contributions have also reduced. So I've checked with my pension provider and I am required to keep up with that regular contribution. So what I actually need to do is overwrite that. And I'll just show you whereabouts you can do that. So I'm just going to use the little shortcut to go to the employee's record in the top left. I'm going to go to pensions, manage schemes, and I'm going to click edit on this scheme. And at the bottom, you'll notice the employer contributions, as I mentioned, is currently a percentage and 3%. But because I've checked I need to overwrite this, I'm going to change that to a fixed amount and change it to £44.40 and click OK. We'll save this. We'll just go back to the summary tab and check that overwrite's worked. So we'll go to employers and we can see now that pension contribution has been overwritten there to £44.40. So I'm happy with that. Everything is looking good to go. But yeah, like I say, this is a common thing to do, but do check with your provider if you're unsure or if you've got any questions. They'll be able to help you with that, whether that's applicable to the company. And again, those pension contributions will only change that one employee because we did that in their record. So anyone else, even if they're on the same pension scheme, their contributions won't be affected. Save this, come out. So that's adjustments, that's their payments taken care of. And for the sake of this webinar, everyone else's pay is fine. So I'm just going to highlight everybody and I'm going to continue with my payroll just as normal. So process date, remember, is February. I'm just going to go ahead to the pre-update reports. There's a couple in here I just want to show you. Just standard ones, so they're already in the payroll, but I've got these favorited at the moment. I'm going to click on laser 2 per A4 sheet, payslips, preview these. And I just want to show you how that SMP is going to kind of show up on the payslip. So I'll just make this a little bit bigger. And luckily it's employee 1 at the top. And we've got their reduced salary, as you can see, the £571.40. And then at the bottom, we can see this nice and clear, the parental pay got its own line, and I'm happy that that's pulling through the right figure there. So we can close this for now. Another report, the payment summary part 1, just generally a great one to use before you update the records. Loads of figures on there, nice little summary of anything you may need to reconcile, but we'll preview this. And again, make it a little bit bigger. And we can see employee number 1 at the top. We'll just go along and we can see that parental payment there of £1,246.17. So I'm happy with that. That's my pre-update reports kind of done for now. So I'll close these down. I'm just going to move on to my next step, which will be to update the records. Always take a backup when you're prompted as well. It's a good idea just to have a little safety net. So let me just take one now. I'm just going to pop in today's day, for example. Click save and do that. It should be nice and quick. Fabulous. And let's go ahead and update the records for everybody. Great, all good. Next step for me is going to be to submit my full payment submission. So click on this. And this is just the normal information. So it's going to be the payments, the deductions, the total liability as well. And you can just ignore this window. It's just with me being in the training environment. But I'll click continue. And submit. And yeah, we've got that total liability, but remember what Duncan mentioned before about reclaiming statutory payments. We'll actually need to do another submission to HMRC to tell them to expect this figure to be reduced. But for now, I'm going to submit this, and Duncan can go over that with you in a little while. So that's my full payment submission submitted. My payroll's done as far as I'm concerned. I'm just going to pop back to the slides. Have a little bit of a recap of what we've just went through there with adjusting the payments, because there was a couple of different scenarios. So first of all, we looked at Make Up Basic, which was an option if you, for example, topped up the maternity pay to the full wage for the employee. So you just click on Make Up Basic, and it would change the hours and number value of a particular pay element. We also looked at manual adjustments. So if your employee has worked a couple of days before they went on maternity, in my case, I just needed to work out how much they were getting paid before they left. And I can use that little calculator in the hours and number box to do that. One last adjustment we did as well was the pension adjustment. So I was required to keep up with my pension contributions as an employer, because I checked with my pension provider. So what I did, I went into the record, I went to pensions, manage schemes, and then edit, and I could just change that employer contributions from a percentage to a fixed amount, which in my case was £44.40. So that's everything to do with adjusting your payments, recording maternity. It's now going to be a case of reclaiming those statutory payments. So for this, I'm going to pass you back to Duncan. And thank you very much, everyone. It's over to you, Duncan.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you for that demo. Great stuff. I'm going to finish things off then by taking you through reclaiming statutory payments. So we've already laid the groundwork on this, and we've explained how to check if you qualify for that small employers relief. So once you get to the end of the month, and this is a monthly task, even if your payroll is weekly, you'd only do this once at the end of the month, you'll run a P32 report, which will confirm what amounts you'll be reclaiming, including the NIC compensation if you qualify for small employers relief. And then you'll do a submission known as an employer payment summary, which will report the amounts reclaimed to HMRC so that when you make your payment, they're expecting the correct amount. So I just want to show you this in the demo. So I'm going to bring the slides down. Now for my demo, I've completed my January pay run and I paid some SMP in January. So I want to check my payment for that tax month. That was tax month 10. And I also want to show you how to do the submission. So to check the payment due, we need to run the P32 report. So that is available as a link. This is what we used earlier on in the demo to run the report. You can also find it from the main reports option within the period end folder. So I've added it to my favorites, Form P32 Employer Payment Record. So I'm going to run this for my January tax month. So that was tax month 10 to 10. And just showing you the preview on screen there, you can see we've got the amounts of PAYE and national insurance that was reported in my FPS, but we also have some amounts recovered. So the full amount of SMP that I paid in January is being recovered, as well as that 3% NI compensation as a small employer. So total amount due has been reduced because of this reclaim that we've made. And as per this note, if there is a value in box 16, which there is, we do need to submit our EPS to HMRC. So that's how we get the money back. We offset it against the tax and national insurance that was payable for that period. And to report that, and this is something you do, as I say, at the end of the month, you need to send an employer payment summary. So again, there is a handy link for that in the payroll links here on the left-hand side. Alternatively, go to e-submissions and then click employer payment summary. A reason you choose, in this case, is the first one. You're adjusting a payment because you're recovering statutory payments. It will then show the tax month that the submission relates to. And it will then display the amounts reclaimed for the tax year to date. So January was the first month I did any reclaim, but when I do this at the end of February, I'll be seeing year-to-date values for the SMP reclaimed, which I can reconcile back if I look at the last two P32 reports. So I'm just going to click onto next. There's the box to enter CIS deductions where applicable, and any calculated apprenticeship levy payment. And then if I complete this wizard, you can ignore the warning. This is just because I'm in the training room. It then takes you onto the submission itself, the employer payment summary. And if I click continue, I can check my details, and then I would click submit just to view the tax year and some other general details, and clicking submit will send that through to HMRC. So that is how you report the reclaim amounts. It's done at the end of the month. It needs to be submitted no later than the 19th of the following calendar month. So I've got until the 19th of February to send this. Just sent it now, and I can look back at that submission. I can look back at the details by going into the e-submissions log here on the left-hand side. And then if I select the EPS and click details and then more details, you can actually see the values that were included. So that is reclaiming the payment. Nice and simple month-end task. Run your P32, and if you've reclaimed during the tax month, do an EPS submission. So last thing we've got lined up for you is a little bit of troubleshooting, trying to address some of the more common issues that you might come across when dealing with statutory maternity pay. And we're going to start with the number one issue that comes up, and this will relate to employees who have received SMP before. Now, if you've got an employee that's had maternity pay before, there will be some information stored in their year-to-date values in relation to the weeks paid for the previous baby. Now, that information needs to be cleared out in order to correctly calculate the SMP for the next child. And there's a couple of different ways you can do this depending on how you set up the SMP. So if you're setting up by using the recording maternity option, you will see a prompt, the one on the left-hand side of this slide, telling you that you've already paid it to this employee, and are you wanting to record SMP details for a second child? Now, if you know for sure that that's what you're doing, I'm setting it up, and I know they've had it in the past, you would simply click yes, and that will reset all of the information required. And then you can just enter your dates and carry on. Now, if you're at all unsure, you can click onto no to view the current details. If you then recognize that, yes, this is old information for the previous child, you can come out of the screen and go back in, and you can click yes to reset the information. Alternatively, you can go into the year-to-date values manually to remove the weeks paid for SMP. So I'm just going to show you both of those workarounds as a quick demo. So in my demo, I do have an employee who has had a baby previously and received SMP. It's employee number 4. And if I went into the recording maternity option, I'll see this prompt asking if I want to record details for a second child. If I'm not sure, safest thing to do is to click no, And that would show me straight away that, yes, this was a previous child, 2017, 2018. So what I can then do is I can close out, I could go back in and I could click yes, which would then clear the information. But before I do that, I want to show you the other way of doing it. So if you were to set it up through the employee record, again, you'd go onto the absence tab, you'd click SMP, you'd see that there's previous information in here. And what you might be tempted to do is just to go ahead and replace that information with the due date for the next baby, the ended work date for the next one, recalculate the average pay, and tick the box for medical evidence. But the problem that you get when you do that is that within the record, if I go to employment and year-to-date values, there is still 39 weeks of SMP recorded. And when I go into enter payments to check the amount, which I'll do for my next pay date, get no SMP calculated. So whenever troubleshooting an SMP issue, my tip is to drill down, click on this little drop down arrow, shortcut into this information, check the entitlement tab. So check these dates. That is the correct start of maternity pay period. It's showing an entitlement, but what it's also showing me is 39 weeks previously paid. So that's the problem in this case. Two solutions. You can either go into the employee record, into the year-to-date values, onto statutory payments, and you can replace that figure with 0. That would get you around it. Or to potentially avoid that problem, you could record the details this way, recording maternity. We know it's for a second child, so we're going to click yes to clear all the information out. And then it's just a case of re-entering the details. And once I've done that, so I've just done that very quickly. I've entered the dates, last day of work. I can then go into enter payments. And you can see that it is now calculating. So just be cautious with that message. So employee 1, who is currently receiving SMP, I would always click no to them because I don't want to clear this information. This needs to be in place while I'm paying SMP. You only click yes if you're setting it up and it's for the next child. So just highlighting that one because that is the most common sort of troubleshooting scenario that you'll come across. Other reasons for no SMP calculating other than the previous child are that the average earnings may be too low. So if you go in that recording maternity screen, it will show you the average earnings. It will show you whether they qualify on that basis. You can even see kind of the breakdown. And a third option might be that you've got the manual statutory pay calculations box selected. So that is found within the employee record, and you can simply clear that checkbox. Or if you use the quick SMP screen, it will alert you. It will tell you that you've got it selected, and it will ask you if you want to clear it. So it's one of the advantages of the quick SMP screen. The other troubleshooting you might need to do is if the SMP amount is perhaps less than you're expecting. So two things to check. Number one, have you entered the correct process date? So for reporting to HMRC, your process date should be the date the employees are paid, the date they get the money. And then keep in mind that statutory payments are calculated up to that date. So if you normally pay your staff in arrears, you might find that the first SMP payment is higher than you expect, but the last payment would then be lower. They'll still end up with the same amount overall. Or if you pay on a pay date before the end of the month, but you usually pay your staff to the end of the month, you'll find that the first payment is a bit lower than you'd expect for a full month, but then again, the last payment will be higher for the same reason. So make sure it's the right process date and then consider that it is calculated up to that date. The other reason it might be lower than expected when it comes to the standard rate of SMP is if 90% of average weekly earnings was below the standard rate. So in that scenario, it remains at 90% of average weekly earnings. It doesn't go up to the higher amount. So I just wanted to share those troubleshooting tips with you, and that nearly brings us to the end of the webinar. But we are going to stick around a few minutes because we want to make sure we've answered as many questions as possible. I also want to tell you about some further support that you can access. So if you think of a question after you leave the webinar today, a couple of useful resources for you. So first of all, there's our online help centre at sage.co.uk/help. You can also get to this help centre from within Sage 50 Payroll by clicking on any of the help icons. So from there, you can search our knowledge base. You can read our support guides. So an excellent guide on absences, which includes all the statutory payments. Look out for a webinars link at the top of the help centre. That will show you the upcoming webinars and also link off to our recordings. And if you need to contact our support team, you'll be able to find all their contact details on there as well. As well as the Help Centre, we also have Sage University, an excellent online resource for you, completely free for you to register for Sage University at sageu.com. And then if you find your way to the Sage 50 Payroll Learning Path, you'll find a number of courses you can take. So e-learning courses, online certification, as well as some bite-sized learning topics. So free to you as a Sage member, so get yourself registered if you haven't already done so and see what's available. Now, for the remainder of the time, we are going to be tackling your questions. So keep an eye on the Q&A if you'd like to ask a question or you're interested in seeing questions and answers from other audience members. Remember, if you want to keep any of the Q&A, you will need to copy and paste it into another document, as you will not be able to download that from the session. But you can download a copy of our handouts if you'd like them. So click on the documents icon. Feel free to grab one or both of them. Hi again, everyone, and thanks to all of you that have stuck with us till the very end there. I can see that we're just getting the very final answers out to those last questions that have sneaked through at the end. So thanks for keeping us and the team busy today. We are going to shortly wrap things up, so just a reminder to complete the exit survey as you leave. We'd really love to hear your feedback on today's session. And do look out for your follow-up email arriving later today with links to register for future webinars and the link to watch back the recording for today's session. So don't forget, we've got paternity pay coming up on Thursday. Get yourself signed up for that, and we are also taking bookings for our payroll year-end webinars that'll be starting from the 4th of March. So check out what's available. But as we have now run out of time, on behalf of myself and Alice and the team, thanks everyone for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the session. Look forward to seeing you again soon on another webinar. Goodbye for now.